have resolution, let's see, sorry, recommended practice 1740C, radio frequency identification specifications for interline baggage. Recommended practice 1745, baggage information services. This one is specifically for how the airlines message each other to transfer information about baggage being processed at airports. It's literally the SQL queries behind the baggage processing there. And RP 1800, automated baggage handling of the IATA license plate concept. Also, handling baggage based off of the number and data that's actually stored on these tags, be it printed, the license plate, the 10-digit or character number which you find at the bottom of each barcode, which identifies your suitcase, or what's stored on the baggage tag, digitally if it's an RFID tag. The recommended practice 1740C trials, they actually started a long time ago. First one was in 1998. Both high frequency and ultra high frequency tags were used. The read accuracy versus barcode tags was the biggest deal for airlines. Barcode tags have a rough accuracy of anything from 70 to 80% regarding barcode scanning at speed in baggage handling systems. RFID tags currently can get up to 99.7%. They've been pushing to improve the standard to get up to 99.9%. Considering that these tags can move at, these suitcases with the tags can move at high speed on the conveyors, it can improve efficiency at airports and make sure that your baggage is not lost or actually makes it onto a plane on time. Of all the, in general, these tests also verified international interoperability. That tag, an RFID tag made in the US would work in Europe or Asia and vice versa. Of all the locations where these tests have been done, there's only 2 airports that currently use RFID tags for actual baggage tracking, that they literally will ignore any non-RFID tags if they're created within the airport. You go to these places, you will get an RFID tag. These places are Las Vegas, where many of us have been to, and Hong Kong. Delta, as I said regarding about their implementation, what's interesting is they only implement it in read-only mode. So they don't really put any data on their tags. These tags just contain the factory data, and the only information that's not duplicated between tags is a tag ID number. This is what they're probably using for tracking baggage. So how does the RFID chips work? Do the chips work on for airlines? Well, they're based off of the ISO 18006C standard. It's also called EPC Gen 2. EPC, Electronic Product Code. It's the evolution of everybody's well-known UPC tags, which you find on anything you buy at stores. It's also, the full name can also be EPC Global Class 1 Generation 2 tags. The frequencies that they work on are 860 to 960 megahertz. Most commercial readers that you'll find, such as the Proxmark and so on, will not operate at these frequencies. They cannot read them. You usually need to get a special reader, generally use it if you look up on eBay or any site using this information, the names, ISO 18006C or EPC Gen 2, you will find readers and writers for them. These are also commonly used in parking lots, such as if you have a sticker that you have to place on your windshield to enter a parking lot, it's one of these tags. And some locations in the United States have actually implemented these tags for toll roads. So you attach it to your license plate usually, and as an active, those are active versions of these tags, and it will register your car as passing through a toll. One second here. Apparently, PowerPoint doesn't like the table here. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. The memory structure. Okay. The memory structure. Well, there's 4 banks of memory on each tag. 00 is reserved memory. It usually contains the kill password, the read and write passwords and the kill password. Out of all this, it's just 4 16-bit binary words for each for this tag, this bank. Memory bank 01 is a unique item identifier. It's writable by airlines, and it's about 10 words, 10 16-bit binary words long. Memory bank 10, the tag identification memory, identifier, is 6 binary words long, 16-bit binary words long. This this number is generated by the factory as the tags are created, and in general, it is not modified by the airlines. As I said, Delta most likely uses this number for its baggage handling systems to identify the actual tag via RFID. Then there's bank 11 or 3. It's a user-defined memory. You can have any. You can pretty much have anything in it, though IATA has defined a standard for this. In most tags currently, it's only two 16-bit words long. Can't really store any information, but newer tags are supposed to have much more space, which can store a lot more information and a lot more personal information for each person. So what's the use of these banks on the luggage tags? Well, bank 00 is not used. Even though it has a read, write, and kill password, they're not set. So that means you put the passwords are literally 0000 for all of them. And that means that the tags are usually active when they leave the airport. Bank 01 contains the license plate number and your flight date. The license plate number is obligatory. The flight date is a conditional piece of data. Bank 10, it's not used as a standard. Bank Bank 3 has space available for any use, but it's set up to be able for manufacturers to create much higher capacity tags. I said for the memory contents, the license plate for Bank 01, license plate code, it's obligatory, 10-digit alphanumeric. The flight date, which is interesting, it's conditional, but the actual format of it is just 1 to 365 or 366. There, it is literally the number, the day, of how many days have passed in a year. That's how it's set. So it's quite literally nothing special regarding any encoding. Security information. So here's the memory contents. Security information is literally an 8-bit data bit, 8 bits of data, which will say, has your suitcase passed the scanners, security, is it meant to be manually checked or not? That is all stored, well, should be stored on the tag. In addition to that, you can have baggage routing through what areas of the airport has it gone through. Your flight data. Are there any connecting flights? Where are you flying to? Where are you flying from? Your frequent flyer level. In other words, your number, frequent flyer number. The screening airport code. So where did you check in with the suitcase? What's the destination airport code? And what's the internal airport status? What's the status for that specific airport of that suitcase? And of course, if you opt for door-to-door delivery, your home address. All this data is not encrypted and is readable to anybody with such reader. if it is implemented in the tag. Paper versus plastic. Delta and Las Vegas issue paperback tags. They're the same tags that you have at you get with any airline. Only thing is, if you hold it up to light, you can actually see the RFID chip in it. Other airlines, such as Qantas, have gone a step further. They actually implemented a frequent flyer bonus, which is called the Q-Bag tag. You can buy two for about $100, and these tags literally just contain the chip inside that's inside the paperback tag. This chip is writable by the airline at the airport when you hand the suitcase in. To use this, you do not need the paperback tag. Everything is based off of what's written on the reusable tag. And there are already third-party tags, such as the Rebound tag, which contains both a normal NFC chip, which you can program via a standard Android phone, putting on whatever information you want in case the bag is stolen or something. They could use their phone to read your address or phone number to get in contact with you. It also contains the ISO 18000-6C chip inside it. So it can also be programmed by the airline to be used as a replacement to paper tags. All of these can be applied on any suitcase whatsoever. And as with TSA locks, what we're looking at is for the near future, these tags will probably be integrated into the actual suitcases. The thing is, with these tags, there are some security and privacy issues regarding the standard. Tags are not killed, deactivated, when you leave the airport. When you leave the airport, the tags are just as active as any of them. You can, they can be read on the street or anywhere. The tags also maintain their previous data until they're rewritten. And third-party readers, writers are easily available. You can buy one for about $200 that works on USB or on any phone. And because of the large number of airlines and airports, it's very hard to implement an actual encryption scheme that will make it so everybody can read it, but not anybody outside of the industry can, especially if you have rolling passwords and so on for that. So what if ride-sharing or taxi services put a reader inside their trunk? Well, they can capture your data from that. Where you flew in from, what's your frequent flyer number? Who are you actually? Same thing with hotels. Or if you want to be a little bit more malicious, why not just buy a long-range reader and walk down the hallway of a hotel in Vegas? See who's in the room, if the tags have that part of the data implemented. And as an accidental discovery, when a colleague was bringing me some tags, he was flying out from Vegas with multiple tags in his suitcase. They could not process that suitcase. They had to manually remove as many tags as they could find. There were only 3 or 4 possible tags left in it. They still couldn't process it, and they had to manually process the entire suitcase from the check-in desk to the airplane there. So there are problems in the implementation as is. Malicious possibilities. What about creating a malicious tag that can duplicate nearby tags, rewrite itself, rewrite, modify nearby tags? You can DDoS a baggage processing system. Let's have multiple suitcases with malicious tags that duplicate and replay data from other nearby tags. Can the baggage processing system respond to suitcases popping up in 2 or more places at the same time? How can they, and if they respond to it, how? Do they need to actually stop baggage processing for the entire airport or terminal to actually find those suitcases and get rid of them? Or here, stop, you can't go on. Oh, wait. You can also include security processing information in the tag. How about if you rewrite your own tag and say, yeah, I passed all my security checks, I can go on. Or how about saying, yeah, I don't want to go to Vegas, I want to go somewhere else. Let's go to Bali or whatever there. The suitcase, can you reroute this suitcase? Or how about if your flight is overbooked? Well, just say that other passengers' bags haven't passed security while they're in the cart going up to the airplane. Can we change the destination of their suitcases also, too? That's a question that hasn't been answered. It depends a lot from the back-end systems of the airline how well they're implemented and how what data do they store, but it's a reasonable question. It's a resolution 753 has stated that all airlines have to implement full baggage tracking by the 1st of June of this year. It doesn't matter what type of technology they use, they just have to track your baggage just like any package from UPS or whatever. This year, June 6th, they issued the RFID Bag Tag Initiative. The standard, recommended practice 1740C, has to be fully implemented by every single airline by 2020. So we will be seeing much more of these tags in the near future. So airlines, this message is more than for the crowd, it's for the airlines who are probably going to be watching this along with their lawyers. We want to help. Contact us before trying to sue us for this. But yeah, we'd like to help you guys. Make sure that any of these situations which I described are not possible. We'll happily, if you can show us that they're not possible, hey, we'll say it out loud that it's not possible to do this. But until then, we're here to help. Documentation. Well, here's 2 documents which you can get regarding the first one is the business case document from IATA regarding the feasibility of RFID baggage tags. The second one is actually the data standard of EPC tags, how the data is stored, transferred, and everything. The big document, the Passenger Services Conference Resolutions Manual, is not public, is not accessible to the public, but you can find it easily on Google. I'm not linking it directly to this, but if you do use the search query, Passenger Services Conference Resolutions Manual, file type, PDF, it should be the 4th thing that pops up on Google. There. It's as a tip, it's on an FTP site there. Don't worry, it's a full anonymous FTP, no problems at all to get it. And continuing research, if you are flying, good here. If you're flying anywhere in the near future, and if you care to send it to me, I will upload these slides to my SlideShare account with the actual address in this case for shipping, where you can find where you can ship the tags to me. I will be documenting them to see how long is it taking to implement the standard. And last slide. Thanks to all of you for attending this talk or watching it on YouTube or whatever. Questions? We can talk in the hallway. Yep. Yep. ADM. Okay, thanks. Okay. Thanks for the help.
You're welcome.
Really? Oh, please don't do this to me. something about bourbon. Hopefully you already know this, but I'm gonna teach you to sip it instead of just kind of like drink it down. All right, we'll talk about that in a minute.
You have like 20 minutes.
I understand. I'll be quick. Just let me know when we can get started. You good?
Are you good?
I'm good.
Huh?
I'm good.
All right, so I can start recording.
Start recording. All right. Welcome everybody.
One voice.
Sorry. I'm used to being loud enough I don't have to have a mic. I got you. So I want to welcome everybody here. Welcome to Kentucky. As I said earlier, we're going to be passing out a little bit of bourbon. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to sip that and enjoy it. So keep that in mind. You don't have to participate, but I do ask if you do participate, please be 21 or older. All right. The talk today is they put their DMZ in the cloud, right? Now, I want you to think about that just for a minute. Think about what that means to you, the cloud. Every time we hear the cloud, we think, oh, it's weak. It's not as secure as inside. So today I'm going to challenge that a little bit, and I want you to think about it, especially from a pen test perspective. So this is me. I've been playing with social engineering a little bit. If you go out and check out Dr. Hacks, you'll notice that it's not my picture that's out there. When I went out to some of the other cons, it's amazing how many people will invite me out to dinner, and I show up. I said, dude, I got you. So let's have some fun with it. I tinker and I break things and I ask what if, right? So for the past, I'm going to say 20, that's not true. For 40 years, I've been breaking stuff and trying to see how it works. It's just in my DNA. So some of the things I have been doing for the past 16 years, I've been working at a fairly large corporation, and I've had an opportunity to work with some really talented people. And I've put together some teams, and those teams have taught me a lot of things, especially with pen testing, working with the SOC, working against each other, making it better for the company. But no matter how good we are, we keep running into problems. And part of that problem is the design of our networks, the way that things are laid out. And what I would tell you is, as we continue on through this, that is a fundamental problem that's got to change. Otherwise, we're going to have the same problems 40 years from now. So let's look at this a little bit. I did tell you we're going to do some sipping of some Kentucky Creek water. So we'll do that here in a little while. Again, this is tradition that I've had, not to, we've done it a couple of different times. It seems to work well. So I appreciate the participation in that. All right. So what I'm going to talk about is a DMZ as a service. And this is a little different. You've probably heard of SaaS as a service and all these other things. But the model I'm going to talk about today is a little bit different. The DMZ as a service takes a certain portion of the DMZ and puts it in the cloud, but it leaves other products in other places. And you're going to kind of get a picture of it here in just a second. I want to talk about if it's easy, is it easy to break into it? Or is it going to be disruptive to pen testing? So traditionally what you have, you've got this three-tier design, right? Everybody's familiar with three-tier design. The three-tier design, you got the outside they're trying to get in, and you've got your end user down here on the end. Basically, we do recon on this. We see the DMZ, we see the IP addresses, we run scans, we see vulnerabilities, we try to hack in. We see URLs, and we try to get into their website, right? If all of that fails, we figure out the network that the user's on, try to phish the user, and then from getting on the network with the user, we come in that way. And that's kind of what it really looks like, right? You got Swiss cheese in there, right? And that Swiss cheese, when you think about that, it makes you, I mean, we all laugh, right? Who in here thinks that this is wrong? Am I right? Yeah. So what I would ask you is, why do we keep doing the same thing? You know, why do we keep doing the same thing? This is the new model. And I want to talk a little bit about how this really functions. I'm going to take the original idea that when I would go to Acme, on the other screens I had acme.com. When you go to acme.com, it took you right straight into my DMZ. Well, guess what? Now you're already inside my network. In this model, I'm going to take you to a cloud DMZ. You're not even in my network. You're in a cloud DMZ that I have a provider for. I can be somebody that's got something in Amazon, somebody that's got something in an internal corporation. Think about something like SharePoint. Now, good Lord, never share SharePoint out to anybody in the world, right? But what if I could? Would that enable us? Would that help us out in business? So, you know, let's think about what that might do. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to dual authenticate, you know, two-factor. I'm going to dual authenticate my user. They're going to go to this cloud DMZ. They're going to type in the normal URL for my company. They're going to go to this cloud DMZ. They don't know anything's different, right? DNS records gotten changed. They don't know it. They don't care. When they authenticate, they're now an authenticated user on this particular service. If they don't authenticate, what happens? Exactly. So before you get to the URL at all, before you see the application at all, what do you have to do? Authenticate. Now, here's the real catch. I've got a piece of equipment sitting inside my system, inside my network, that does one thing. It talks out to the cloud DMZ as a service. It does not allow inbound traffic. Think about that for a minute. No inbound traffic. It only allows outbound. Now, once a session is created, it allows it there. But the session has to be created first. Okay? What happens in this situation? The authenticated user meets a session that's already looking for somebody, and they get connected in the DMZ as a service. Okay? Once that happens, then the acme.com URL router will actually route them to my acme.com server. I can put this anywhere. Again, Amazon, Azure, inside my corporate facilities. Whoops, a little too far on that one. There we go. Now, what I really want to pay attention to here is the DMZ as a service, they can't get through my firewall. I have put up firewall, deny all on the outside, okay? You can't get into me. I'm only talking out. Second portion of this is if I tried to, as a user, go directly to this, I can't do it because there's nothing facing outwardly here. On my web application, my application itself, my application, does it look like it's talking directly to the internet? No, it's only talking to this router thing, right? Well, let's say that router thing has a authenticated, right? It has an authenticated session back to the DMZ as a service. Now, it's mutually authenticated, which means coming from one side and going to the other, they know each other, right? So it's not like I can do a man in the middle on this one. And just kind of let that sink in. Down at the bottom, you're going to notice my web server can't talk out directly. My pen tester can't break in directly. So they're going to have to do some things that's pretty complicated here, not like it is today. Now, let's recap this just real quick. How many of you know what a statement of work is? Yeah? Statement of work when you're doing multiple parties, how complicated is that? Is that easy? Yeah, it gets pretty complicated, so I just made your life as a pen tester a lot rougher. When I start looking at Recon, and I start looking at Acme Company, what's my firewall at Acme Company look like?
Brick.
It's a brick. You don't see anything now. We drop on down to the authentication. I got multi-factor on my end user. I've got mutual authentication coming in from my company out to the DMZ. So breaking into that's going to be a little challenging. It's going to limit lateral movement drastically because my end users are no longer on my network. They're outside. They're coming from outside. There are problems with this. Don't get me wrong. So, Shodan, we talked about this. Just to recap, nothing's going to make it in from the outside. Yeah, let's say you can find the login page. Again, somehow or another you crack some passwords, but I'm two-factor. Now you got to figure out how to break the two-factor. Once I get past the two-factor, I'm only going to be able to obtain access to one URL. In the past, if you got on a box, what could you do? You could go all over the place, right? Now you're going to have to hack the web application itself and figure out a way to break into the box from the web app. Just throwing it out there, okay? So I'm throwing up a bunch of barriers here. You know what that's called? Defense in depth. This is something that we've really gotten away from. This pattern hasn't been really available from what I've seen. I've been doing this a long time, and right now the company I work with, I watch for their remote connectivity. I watch out for vendors, watch out for other companies as we outsource maybe, well, basically as we outsource roles, let's say 1,700 roles. I got to have all those folks coming in to work on my applications. Well, guess what? This would be a pretty easy way to set them up. Do I have to have a VPN? Oh, I eliminated that. So I just put some folks out of a job, unfortunately, but they got some other stuff they can work on. I eliminated a bunch of firewall rules, didn't I? How often do I have to change firewall rules on this thing? Wow, daggone. It's a good model. It's a good model, right? So keep it in mind. With that, I don't know if you can read that very well. What I want you to think about when you read this is this is you if you don't pay attention to this kind of a model coming up, right? I used to be able to do all this stuff, but now we got too many security protections, right? That's going to be us if we don't watch out for these models. They're disruptive. It's kind of like what happened to Uber and the taxi service. It's kind of like what happened to Blockbuster, right? What happened to Blockbuster with Netflix, you know, bye-bye for the most part. This is what I want you to be thinking about. Now, I'm not going to tell you that all corporations and all little companies are going to move this model real quick. But what I am going to tell you is this exists. Whoops, sorry. Right here. The company that actually came up, this is a working model, so I'm not telling you about some pie in the sky, this might work. This is real. There's a company that came out with this, Soho. Soha, I keep doing that wrong. Soha. They came out with this idea. Another large corporation that you may be familiar with, Akamai, they saw this solution and went, we got to have that. And what I'm telling you today is watch out for this. This model, if it works and if it catches on, it's going to change the way we have to do our jobs. And as we continue to go to the cloud, as we continue to outsource, as we continue to do these types of things within IT, within businesses, this is what you're going to be facing. Okay? So, to celebrate the fact that you are now aware of this, I'm going to ask you a question. If you would, lift up your cups. And I don't want you to throw them back, but I want you to get to where you can just get the bourbon just right. You can smell it, yeah. Smell of it. This is something called I.W. Harper. I don't know if you guys have ever had it or not. But just kind of sip it just a little. Don't, just get a little taste. Feel that burn. Not only do you feel that burn, but you can taste some different flavors. You can make that last the rest of the afternoon if you want to. Or you can just toss it back. It won't do much for you. But I just want to thank you guys for taking time to come in here. I want to thank you for the time that the guys put together for DerbyCon. This makes my 6th DerbyCon. I've been out for a couple of years. It just keeps getting better and better. So I appreciate you guys for coming in today. And I'll leave you with this one thing. I'm an eternal security soldier. You may not understand what that means right now, but my question, and I'll leave you with this if you got any questions, what are you going to be doing in 1,000 years? Okay? That's something I ponder from time to time. All right? And I'm serious. What are you going to be doing in 1,000 years from now? Okay? With that, do you have any questions about the solution or about the, go right ahead.
Is this based on any open protocols, or is this patent protected? You know anything about the state of
Right.
others than Akamai being able to do this?
Right now, to my knowledge, Akamai is the only company that has the ability on this, which I think there has to be some way for others to figure this out too. And again, if you can think of a mom and pop shop or a new startup, if they could go to a company and say, here, take care of my DMZ, take care of my authentication. Oh, there's a bunch of companies that do that today. But the catch is that URL router that they have that is encrypted in the way it does mutual authentication. That's the real key. If you could figure out how to do that, it would be a challenge.
Is it possible to DOS the DMZ as a service?
So, I'm sorry? All right. Can you DOS this particular service? In this case, it's Akamai. I don't know if you're familiar with Akamai or not. But trying to DOS Akamai, I'm sure it's possible. But their DMZ as a service, it routes, right? So you could be attacking, I don't know, a few hundred locations at the same time to DOS them is basically what it would amount to. They reroute, so it would be very difficult to do that with them. Smaller mom and pop type situation, maybe not.
How does this solution stack up to some of the recent work by Google, like in Usenix, and some of the Usenix conferences came up with Zero Trust Network Security, and they provide like identity-aware proxies for Google Cloud customers.
To be honest with you, he's asking the question about a Google solution that uses trusted users. It's doing something similar. I don't know how it stacks up. I thank you for the question. Maybe after the talk, you and I can get together and I can get some more information on it. It's one of the reasons I do these talks is to gain information too. So.
Kind of along the same lines, I guess, for those of us who've been doing it for a while, architecturally, how is this that much different than a reverse proxy with two-factor authentication?
It probably isn't, except for this. When you start working with the idea of in the reverse proxy, I don't remember being able to always get it down to the URL level. I don't know that you can always do that.
I mean, I haven't worked on like a reverse proxy platform for a little while, so I don't know if we can get down to the URL level, but I gotta
Yeah.
think that the advanced
There, I,
With the reverse proxy, you still have to whitelist only coming from the DMZ. Since this is outbound, you wouldn't have to do that whitelisting step so that people couldn't go around.
But if you're collapsing it in that case, right? So instead of having the DMZ out here and then this machine that can connect out to the DMZ, having the reverse proxy, collapsing all of that into one function.
I know that we have reverse proxies, and I have never had anybody come to me with a solution that would allow us to do that. And I've asked, believe me, in the past 16 years, this has been one of my pet peeves, is that we knock holes in the firewall. As I've, managed the networks, managed pen test team, watched what we do, managed the SOC to see what we can follow and see what we can see. This is probably the number one thing when I see us allowing thousands upon thousands of different systems to have access to certain things, with all the vendors and the different customers and different work areas that we have. This is the number one thing that concerns me. And I've seen attacks coming through, even when we have, I know it's a good individual, but, maybe they got malware on their side. And because we allow them to do certain things to get in, the ramifications of that, we've faced those a few times. And this, I know, eliminates that. So I'm not saying it doesn't work with a reverse proxy. So we'll need to look into that a little bit more.
What do you feel is still missing for somebody beyond Akamai to be able to present this as a viable solution, versus an in-house DMZ where you own all the hardware soup to nuts? When you move to a cloud solution, is there something you feel is that missing?
Well, the idea behind this is if you try to do it in-house, you've got this one entity, you've got this one entity and that's you, right? And you're having to put out all this effort to protect that, right? Now, what if you then put a entity in Azure, or you then put another entity into some other cloud service, right? With this, all I have to do is drop one of these connectors on the backside, and I'm protected. My perimeter, everybody's on the outside. You got to come through this central point, and then all these points are talking back. I just created a segmented, micro-segmented network with this simplicity. And simplicity is what we want, right? Don't make it so complicated you can't figure it out. Okay? With that, really appreciate everybody. No more questions? Thank you very kindly. Thank you all very kindly. I should have thanked you all.
Somebody else, it could be as simple as, I don't want my part of the cloud in China. Did you talk to that with
HDMI. No. What's up? No thanks, Pan. Oops. Like, sorry, people. The mic's like duct taped up. Stop now. Just live stream it. Where's the HDMI there? Do you need the clicker? Yeah. We will. Just duplicate it. Should I though? Yeah. Michael, the colors are locked, isn't it? Yeah. True time? Should I switch HDMI?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Don't try this one?
No, just leave it.
Do the clicker? Plugged in?
Yeah. Try it. Go back.
Should I drink water? No.
Why not?
You can if you want.
That water you can drink some.
please take a seat and scooch forward, and then he'll know where you were to stack them on the wall. Any questions? All right, if you guys have an emergency, you cannot get out that door. I need you to go out that door, or that door. Okay? That door is blocked in the event of an emergency. Sorry about that. Thank you, folks.
Let's see. Thanks. 4:30. We can start. Let's see. How's everyone's DerbyCon going so far? Everyone having a good time?
Good, yeah.
All right. Let's see. Why are we all here today? So our talk overview. A few things we'll be covering. Information about both of our speakers. A couple background points that you might need to know through the presentation, and a couple frequently used techniques in post-exploitation. We're going to kind of be going over the past of post-exploitation and the future where we see it moving towards. We'll briefly talk about implementing a couple of these techniques in Cobalt Strikes and then conclude. Who am I? My name is Michael Roberts. I have a dog named Wile E. Coyote. I go to the University of Central Florida, and I mostly do Windows security.
Hi, my name is Martin Roberts. I also go to the University of Central Florida, and I focus on Linux security. We will be, just for our introduction, talking about some competitions that we've done in the past. These are all offensive competitions, if you're aware. Panoply at CCDC, and Panoply at Black Hat we won this year, and ISTS and eSentinel are some other offensive competitions. We love to do competitions, and that's why it's here. So we'd like to start off by giving special thanks to some other people that we did this research with. First is Jonathan Chua. He worked with us at X-Force Red this summer, where we interned doing pen testing. So we're going to start off giving some background knowledge. First, what is post-exploitation? Basically, we define it as everything that happens after getting a shell. So a couple questions that we have to ask. How do you move across the network? And how do you gather information on that network that you just landed on? We'd like to start off by just stating that credentials are really important. We believe that credentials are the most important thing you can gather during this red team operation. With credentials, you have basically persistence where you can log into remote services, SMB, SSH, across the network. So credentials are key, and we just want to point that out. That's a premise of our talk. So another necessary background item is what is OPSEC? So another just basic definition, it's preventing what you're doing from getting flagged by your enemy, or in this case, the blue team. As you all know, red team's trying to not get caught by blue team. We'll be talking about it here. So why is post-exploitation important? Why are you here? Why should this matter? So you spend weeks trying to get a shell with Cobalt Strike, or you spend weeks trying to get a shell with your phishing. You might use Cobalt Strike or other products to set up your infrastructure, but you spend a lot of time. So when you get a shell, you're really happy. I'm sure you all know. You want to keep that hard-earned shell. And then second, if you do lose your shell, and it's because of a endpoint detection product getting flagged, flagging your actions, then the blue team is, one, aware of what you're doing, and two, watching you. So their next steps might be to prevent the way that you got in the first time, if that makes sense. So you get a shell the first time, the blue team's going to be working on preventing the way you got the shell, and then also watching your actions across the network, and just generally they're going to be more suspicious. So you do not want to get flagged by the red team, or by the blue team, when you're performing red team operations. And Michael's going to talk about frequently used techniques.
Code execution, which you might be most familiar with, of course, PowerShell, just code execution through command prompt, and a million different old ways of doing command execution that have been around forever. Getting your executable through IEX or BitsAdmin, or just copying it over SMB or something like that. Older methods that are very likely to get caught by endpoint detection response solutions and any mature blue team organization. Lateral movement, obviously pass the hash in a suspicious way will get caught. A lot of times, remote PowerShell and PSExec by a secure organization will get caught. And then later on, we're going to talk about how to improve upon these and new solutions in the industry so you don't have to use WinRM and remote PowerShell for stuff. Persistence, writing a malicious exe to disk and including getting a startup folder or an obvious registry key or even a scheduled task is going to get flagged by an endpoint detection response. At least like CrowdStrike Falcon and Microsoft ATA will flag all of these, especially the last three. So these are kind of techniques that obviously can't be used anymore. A few critical flaws.
Okay, so basically a critical flaw is something that's just going to get flagged by endpoint detection some of the time, most of the time, or all of the time. So leaving suspicious logs behind is the first item we'll be talking about. Just basic things that leave logs behind, login attempts. You want to watch your login time. If the user is 9 to 5 Eastern or something, and you are logging in at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Every day, that could be suspicious if the user hasn't previously logged in at those weird times. So just watch login time, something basic. Sudo attempts for the Linux, Unix systems. Sudo attempts will be logged, and then someone could be checking that out if they're watching logs, if it's a mature organization. And then creating users, something that I hope most people don't do, but some people feel it's necessary to create a user. That's heavily logged. The company's going to be, asking, did we get a new employee recently? Why are we creating a new user? So you should be asking the question, is this necessary for your needs? Excessive disk writes. Do you need to be writing to disk, and can you be running it in memory? A classic example of this, just on Linux, would be curling something down, say Linux prevest script. So curl, the script, and then instead of writing it to disk with like the -o flag, you can just pipe it to bash. It will run in memory as a process, and it won't write to disk. So just things to remember. How can I be running things in memory instead of writing to disk whenever possible? And is the EDR scanning this location? This is something we'll cover here. We'll cover later. Unusual PowerShell commands. Do you need to run the command that you're running? We have an example here. This dig command will return a list of domain controllers in the environment. This dig command can be ran from like Linux, Unix host that you've acquired, instead of having to run a similar command in PowerShell. So if you can't avoid PowerShell just because of PowerShell version 5 logging, look for other ways to do it. Linux hosts, Unix hosts that are on that network. And detection by EDR. Obviously, you want to avoid getting detected by EDR. Some of the reasons we mentioned earlier were if the blue team's watching you, your life's going to be a lot harder. You're not going to be able to gather the information that you need. So if you're outside of normal user behavior, if you're just trying a bunch of creds against the domain controller, just doing really noisy stuff, you could just be flagged by the blue team. So if you're writing to disk, you could be flagged by like EDR if the common tools have signatures with that EDR product. So things to note, just basic things that you should keep in mind during an engagement. You want to follow normal user behavior. You want to use some of these services, SSH, NFS is some of my favorite, like RDP, SMB. Those services are widely used across the corporate network. And even better, they're going to use, most of the time, user credentials that are just similar across all of the hosts. So if you're able to acquire user credentials from, say, a Windows host, and you can use those to log into like critical infrastructure with SSH, or access critical files with SMB. So user credentials are key during post-exploitation. You want to gather those whenever possible. Private keys are obviously useful, assuming they have a weak or no passphrase on them. You can use private keys to log into like critical infrastructure. So those are just some important things to gather during an engagement. And then for like all the Mac users out there, I'm sure most of you have your user in the sudo group, which is necessary for just a lot of your roles every day. But being in the sudo group, the attacker can grab things like the keychain with your user password. So after they unlock your keychain, they have access to things like CrowdStrike Falcon if you're storing that in your keychain. Yeah, just a bunch of things could be stored in your keychain. They can use those credentials to just log into other services that are critical. Yeah, you want to look for, if you're a red teamer, you want to look for just sudo privs on Mac OS or a similar system. And then the looking around the network, probably my favorite thing. Just an example this week, I was on an engagement and I was just looking around the network and I noticed that I was looking at all the SSH banners on that corporate network. The first time I saw it, looking at SSH banners, seeing what products are out there, seeing like the version numbers and stuff like that of SSH, and I noticed there was some like Raspberry Pis on the network. You guys might be questioning, why is Raspberry Pis on a mature corporate network? The answer is actually simpler than you'd think. Signage sometimes will be running off a Raspberry Pi, or in this case, a 3D printer was managed by a Raspberry Pi. So the key isn't to look for Raspberry Pis. The key is to look for hosts on the network that might not be in the classic realm of their endpoint detection. Devices like the Raspberry Pi or something similar that we'll talk about in the next slide. Those devices are almost certainly not monitored, by endpoint detection. So if you're able to launch all your attacks by, that host, you can evade a lot of detection, and you just want to live on those devices because they don't have, any logging probably. We talked about earlier, credentials and keys are helpful to get into those boxes. Just something. Another example, looking around that network, I saw that like NFS was open, and I'm sure most of you are thinking, great, there's probably something great on that share, but it has another use. I saw NFS was open, and then I'm just looking at the Nmap, there was port 80 and port 443 open. I'm sure you can imagine where this is going. I check out the web portal, see what's there, and username, password was admin. So we have that storage controller, and that's great to see the files, but it actually has another use that we want to talk about. If you're on, just say, a compromised Linux host, and you want to avoid writing to disk on that host because you're afraid it could be monitored, people could be looking at it, why not mount an NFS share and write to that? If you're write to it and then access it from that Linux host, it's very unlikely that they're monitoring new NFS shares. But the endpoint detection services that we've looked at, if they do monitor new NFS mounts, they don't block those actions. They just flag it, and then a user has to intervene, which we all know is slow, and they're not going to catch you right away. So you have at least a couple minutes, hours to do things on that host. Michael will be talking about improving techniques.
All right, let's start with code execution. Every day seems like on Twitter there's a new method of code execution that can get around Windows Defender or another endpoint solution. PowerPig's been around for a while. There's plenty of solutions for running completely in memory, avoiding writing to disk, which we talked about earlier, and overall just not getting caught by EDR solutions. Obviously parent process spoofing, and we're seeing a trend of using more C# executables and stuff like that, like GhostPack and stuff written entirely in C# that you can compile yourself to have a different signature. So there's plenty of new techniques for still doing code execution and not using the old methods of PowerShell and stuff like that. Lateral movement, let's see, SharpWMI, I mentioned GhostPack earlier. Distributed COM objects is another new technique. There's tons of new techniques coming out every day that don't involve old lateral movement methods like WinRM and stuff that's going to get flagged immediately. Obviously, private keys on a Unix environment for lateral movement. Persistence, fileless backdoor, so storing completely in registry or another part of the system so it doesn't write to disk. Obviously, antivirus solutions immediately scan everything in disk, and any other endpoint detection will immediately catch something written to disk. So as fileless as you can go. Credentials, Martin briefly mentioned, credentials obviously being the best form of persistence. With valid credentials, you can avoid abnormal activity. So if you know a user's always going to log in to, say, manage a server, then you can use those credentials like that user would, and it's much less suspicious. There's other persistence methods, obviously, that won't get caught by EDR. TACMITR framework is a great place to reference these techniques. There's stuff like using third-party management software that an administrator might be using to manage that server. If you're using that to manage the server in your own way, that's less likely to get flagged. Implementing these techniques. We're just going to briefly talk about, we're just going to briefly talk about some of the ways that we did it, and more broadly, some of the ways that I guess we think you should also implement these techniques. So this is just a picture of a couple compiled Cobalt Strike aggressor scripts that we made into a menu. So MSHDA C script, stuff like that, that's coming out as new ways to execute code or binaries or whatever you want. There's plenty of new executables or methods written in C#, and we see the industry as moving more towards using C# and methods like this to download and execute codes. So a couple more methods, some lateral movement methods, let's see, and then persistence. Some of these are old ways, but we're just pointing out that it can be implemented in Cobalt Strike, and let's see. You want to talk about that?
So those ways can be implemented in Cobalt Strike, or any of the ideas that we mentioned today can be implemented in any platform that you use for your post-exploitation needs. So we don't want to get up here and talk about all the ways maybe you can avoid EDR and all the ways to get your information that you need, whether it be credentials or just other information that you need from the corporate network, without talking about what can be done. So the standard thing you see is red team against blue team, and that's what this picture depicts. So some ways to defend against these techniques that either corporations aren't doing or aren't doing enough of. Lateral movement would be things like network segmentation. An example would be, why does all the Windows hosts need to talk to every other network in the environment? My example earlier with the Raspberry Pi, the signage, or the 3D printer running a Raspberry Pi, why do they need to communicate? You could have network segmentation there. Host-based firewalls, we're a huge fan of in our respective operating systems, so like IP tables on Linux. Why does that Linux host need to, or let's use the NAS example, why does that host that's just serving NFS need every single network open on 80? So why does every single network need to communicate with that NAS host on port 80 or 443? And why is 22 open on that NAS host if no one's using it? And if you do use it, restrict it by IP, because the admin privileges, or the credentials that I mentioned earlier, also worked with SSH. So I was able to SSH into that storage controller. You're basically able to do anything you want to that storage controller. So yeah, host-based firewalls restrict IPs, or just block that port in general if possible. Passphrase on SSH keys is just something basic you could do. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. And then this is a big one. So active monitoring of EDR dashboards. Sure, you have a solution that either tells you when a critical event happens on that host, but someone needs to check it. Someone needs to be alerted when it happens. The NFS thing I mentioned earlier, mature EDRs might flag on new NFS host mount, but if someone's not checking that EDR solution, then nothing happens about it. Some defense techniques for persistence, things like threat hunting, looking at what happened to a host or what's happening to a host and what's changed with the host. Limiting disk writes whenever possible. So you want to avoid a red teamer wants to avoid disk writes, but sometimes it's just not possible. You have to drop a binary on the disk for whatever reason. So limiting, if possible, as a blue team, limiting where they can write, very simple. And then rotating passwords. So you should assume that passwords are compromised. The user that, in my example earlier with the Raspberry Pi, they were logging into the Raspberry Pi, whether it be like VNC, and then they were SSHing outbound to other critical services, which is obviously bad. But the point is the user is going to make mistakes like that, so password rotation has to be a thing. So an old technique is just honeypots. You might be saying, why are you talking about that? Everyone's been talking about it for, who knows how many years. But if an attacker, like I was looking around the network at like NFS hosts, SSH hosts, looking at their banners, you want to catch an attacker doing those actions, and a great way to do it is to set up something like this, where you know that no one else, no one in the business with a legitimate purpose should be accessing this host. So you caught an attacker there, and you can retrace his steps. You know what host he's coming from and things like that. And you just want to log what they're doing because you're assuming that they're doing the same thing on other hosts. And Michael, we're talking about defense techniques for code execution.
Code execution, we all know, like malicious PowerShell commands, common PowerShell commands that shouldn't be run, and there's plenty of ways to block it. At the bottom I say logging. PowerShell version 5 has logging. Every major EDR solution will read these PowerShell logs and alert you if a malicious command is executed. I love sysmon. If you don't have an EDR solution, it's great for being able to see what commands are run and all the post-exploitation activities that are occurring. And of course, know your normal state, which was mentioned earlier in the presentation. Conclusion, implementation. There's plenty of ways to implement more secure OPSEC techniques during post-exploitation, using C#, using PowerPick, using different techniques than the same old persistence, the same old techniques, building your own techniques like GhostPack I mentioned earlier. You have to build on your own in Visual Studio to avoid signature detection. Obviously, most organizations have signature detection, so you want to avoid that. This talk has many benefits to a red teamer if they can remain OPSEC safe during a presentation or during pen testing engagement. They can avoid detection by a blue team. They can last longer on the network. They can provide more results to the customers and stuff like that. So thanks for coming out. Any questions?
Michael.
It's been around. It's been around for a while, yeah. And no one. You're right. Even from a blue team perspective, AES is hard or near impossible.
I'm a Linux fan, man. And I deal with it. I can't scan the crap out of it. I can't watch it.
I used to teach, there was like a podium,
Yeah.
and it was like a step up and then step down, but the board was like step down to the board and then step up to the podium, and I was like, I can't ever teach in this room. I'm gonna flip and kill myself. It's a little bouncy.
I have a new sticker if you want one.
Ooh.
I want to get.
We weren't affected, thank goodness.
I was.
We weren't, thank goodness. Okay, I'm cold up here. That's why I have my sweater.
Cable with reach to plug in.
Alright, just listen up real quick. You can't go out that way. I know it says an exit sign, but it's blocked. The only three exits are over here. Be nice to each other. Please turn off your phones and put them on mute. And turn it to speaker. Look up.
All right, I'm still looking for a cable.
Do you need my help? That's the microphone.
The video cable. This thing right here.
Oh, that one.
If it was a snake, it would have bit me.
I think we're okay. We're good? He's doing thumbs up. It's sort of fun up here. Like when you step, it like bounces me up. Well, I'm happy we could see it up there and not on your screen. Like lean over. Come on.
We unleashed power legs.
Okay, we're good.
We unleashed the power flames.
All right. Ready?
We have like 5 minutes.
We have 5 more minutes to start?
we could goof off.
Okay. I'm telling you, if you keep walking around here, it bounces me up a little bit. It's like a
Hey,
little
hey, 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 hotshot. We're live?
Oh.
I thought we started at 5. 5?
Oh.
Oh.
All right.
All right. Well, hello everybody. My name's Krobe. I work for Red Hat Product Security.
My name is Lisa Bradley, and I work for NVIDIA.
We are here to talk to you today about, hey, you found a vulnerability. Now what do you do with it? Is anyone here in the room a security researcher?
That wants to admit to it.
Nice. Hey, you may have talked to us or our peers in the industry at some point. So roughly today we're going to talk about trying to understand what you found, what do you do with it once you found it, how do you tell people about it, and then making your dreams a reality with sharing your work with the world.
Okay, so the first thing you have to ask is, what are you looking at? Did you actually find something? Can you reproduce it? Are you on the latest version? Because the company could have already addressed it. Is the product that you're looking at in support? Is it a website issue or a product issue? So there are different teams that actually handle that within a company. So if you go to, like, I'm PCERT, if you go to PCERT with a website issue, I'll say, oh no, you gotta talk to this person. I don't deal with the website issues.
Correct. That's a very common mistake that a lot of times you'll get that cross-routing, so it'll delay you in getting your research to the right people.
Right. Another, whoa! We're having fun up here. Okay, we're good?
Anyway.
That must have been really loud for you. I'm sorry.
She's sorry. And really importantly, as you discover a problem, you need to understand what your end goal is. What's your why? Are you looking to turn something in and get a bug bounty? You're looking for money? Are you looking to have the amazing fame of the internet and Twitter laud you for your amazingness? Are you looking to help people? We have a lot of people, especially in open source, that are very altruistic. They're trying to actually make the community better. Are you looking to present at a conference like DerbyCon and share your findings with the world and kind of earn yourself some either intellectual or academic prestige? Are you looking for a future employment opportunity? A lot of companies see security researchers, and they will see that as a potential future employee. If you have a good relationship and it works out and you interact well with each other, it might be a job for you someday. So you need to understand, as you're going through this process, you need to understand what you want to do. What's your end state?
And it could be more than one of these, obviously. So you need to try to balance that when you're working on it.
Absolutely.
What you want to do. So how do you involve the right people? How do you even know who to talk to? I hear that a lot. Like, that's the biggest complaint I think that people hear. Most likely there's a security webpage that the company has, /security, /product security. A little Googling. Usually you could find what you need to do. There's also like the hacker one and Bugcrowd and things like that. They have pages that will just help you direct to the company and the company's security.
There's organizations like FIRST, which is the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. So organizations like Red Hat and NVIDIA and IBM and Intel, we all are part of this organization. You can go there and they'll have a list of contacts on FIRST website. Or you can use an organization like CertCC or JP-Cert. This is a group of people that specialize in trying to coordinate getting the end users a fix. But again, that might not meet with your goals. If you're looking to make money, reporting to CertCC might not get you where you want to go.
Right. And one of the things you have to think about is if the issue you've discovered affects more than one company. That's another reason why sometimes CERT is more helpful, because they know how to go into more than one of the companies and coordinate it for you, instead of you trying to balance that coordination, because I may want to have a different disclosure timeline than you would want. Well,
Maybe.
you're open source, so I don't want you to have the same issue as me, because they'll come out before me.
Now, most modern organizations, vendors, participate in a practice called coordinated vendor disclosure. It's a set of rules that, if you come to me and we understand that your issue affects multiple companies or products, we're going to try to work behind the scenes to get those other vendors to participate in the solution. Most organizations will talk to the researcher. If you come to me and say, I have this issue, I'm going to tell you this also affects X, Y, and Z. Can we please include them? And normally it's a little bit of a negotiation, but it's always, companies like Red Hat always respect the researcher's wishes. If you do not want it shared, we won't. But this is, again, coordinated vulnerability disclosure is part of our philosophy. This is how we help protect the most amount of people under the shortest timelines.
Right, and one of the things is that when you work through this, it's about having a partnership. So the researcher or finder is working with the company and trying to have the best possible outcome. My goal, and hopefully your goal, is to protect as many customers as possible. So having that communication, open communication about how far along you are in the process, of how far the company's along in the process of investigating the issue, if we can, when we're going to fix it, when we're going to address it, so that, the goal is that you don't zero-day me. I mean, it's often a risk sometimes that a company takes, having this open communication, but the goal is to just make sure the most customers are protected and that the fix is out there before anything gets publicly disclosed.
Before the bad guys find it and start using it.
Yes.
So next, you're working with a vendor. How do you actually commit that physical act. Now, a lot of times, you might have a reproducer, you might have some code, you want to share that, you just don't want to post that on Pastebin or shove that into Twitter. Those are considered poor taste. But you want to have some type of protected communication. You want to use a tool like almost all vendor P-certs use PGP. You can talk to us encrypted ways, but there's other ways we can coordinate and kind of get data back and forth and collaborate on an issue.
A lot of the websites that the product teams have also will tell you what type of information they want. They may have a form for you to fill out so that you could submit it securely to them. But the idea is to make sure that you try to collect as much information as you can so that the company can understand what it is that you found and reproduce it themselves.
And also, we mentioned about trying to find your why. Why are you doing this? If you have a deadline in mind, I want to go present at Black Hat with this, or I'm presenting my doctoral dissertation at the end of May. You need to express that up front so everyone understands kind of what the rules of the road are, so to speak. And the vendor might say, I can't accommodate that timeline, could we have more time? Or, that's not a problem, we definitely can do that. But as the bigger the issue gets, the more people you might have to include. So you might be asked when you approach somebody, they might ask you, can we please have more time? Because I also have to include SUSE and Canonical and Oracle. I have to include all these other people that have a say in how the solution gets put together.
This is fun.
So if you get nothing else out of this talk, take a picture of this slide.
Yes.
This is the best way that you could report a vulnerability. The worst way you can report a vulnerability is to run a fuzzer and send someone 8,000 lines of error output and say, I found this, fix it. The best way is to clearly articulate who you are, what you found, what you think the impact is. Again, if you have a mitigation already, if you understand how to fix it, please supply that. That'll make things go quickly.
Definitely.
If you have a proof of concept,
awesome.
Provide that. Tell the person you're disclosing to exactly what you're testing on. I am working on Windows 3.11 on a 386 Dell machine. Just be as descriptive as possible, because that potentially could have hardware and software versions really matter. And as Lisa mentioned, it might already be fixed. And then again, if you have a timeline, I need to present this to my, defend my doctorate, you need to state that. And then, who wants to get credit? Who's going to get credit for this? If you're able to provide this information clearly and succinctly, it helps the vendor very quickly triage this and understand this is something important. This person has done their work. They're a good partner. We want to try to give this priority versus the 8,000 line report that's going to take months to sift through. Be clear and concise and explain what I found and what you think the impacts are.
Well, another thing you have to think about is that by time the company might find the right people and reproduce it, it could be some time from when you reported it. And you already could be on the 5th or 6th thing that you found by then. So you really don't want to have to come back and then say, oh, geez, I didn't understand this step, or I didn't understand, or how did you get that? Because then there's more and more questions, and you might be like, I'm already way past that. And we will ask more questions if we can't reproduce it. So think about that. And when we talk about the credit, I think we sort of were light on that when we talked about the coordinated vulnerability disclosure. That's like another thing, that's the outcome. If you want to get credit, most of the companies do security bulletins or have an acknowledgement page or something like that, and they'll clearly acknowledge your name, and then you have, if fame is your thing, you get credit for that. They attach it usually to a CVE.
I'll send you stickers.
And some people do more than,
Correct.
Yeah, some send stickers, some send shirts, and some pay money.
Mm-hmm.
I do a nice little thank you in the bulletin.
Absolutely. And again, when you're engaged with any party and they have like a ticketing system, it's important to try to get that ticket ID or ask them for a bug number, so that as you're communicating back and forth, because a lot of times researchers we work with will have 5 or 6 things they're exploring at the same time. So you can say, I'm talking about issue 2 versus issue 28. So you can be very clear in your communication back and forth. And what goes on behind the scenes, we are scrambling around like
Scrambling.
idiots. It's, we are trying to understand what you just told us. And again, if you give us that in that concise format, it's easier for us to understand what you found and what we need to do to try to test it, reproduce it. We're trying to determine the priority of the issue. Is this a big problem? Is it a little problem? Is it somewhere in between? What other products and versions are affected? Because a lot of vendors will have a fleet of products in the portfolio. If you find it in one place, there's a potential it's going to be in other spots. So from my perspective, you find something in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, I have to go look at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have about 15 different streams that I have to go check.
Yeah, and we also think about other companies that are affected too. So that's also going through in the back of our mind. If we have this problem, who else might have this problem?
Who's downstream? Who are the partners that need to participate in this?
Yeah. So I like the next part and the bottom part of the slide because this really goes through my head every time. It always seems that a researcher finds something like a week right before I'm about to release some, you know, it already went through QA and all this stuff. I'm releasing something. So I'm like, oh, wait a minute. If we do a 3-month cycle then I can't get it out from 3 months and a week now from today, and they just gave me a 90-day disclosure deadline. Oh no, what do I do? Right? Typical, always. It always seems the case. So a lot of that, oh no, how do I get the resources together if I need to immediately put this out, if it's going to go live? Really panicking in the background. I panic. I'm always doing that. Like, ah! So, and I'm trying to think what are the other ones that we have. Negotiation. That's sort of a lot of work. It's like, I'm like, okay, after I figure it out, after I get the right team to work on it, after we figure out the timelines and things like that, and I look and I say, oh no, they gave us this disclosure date. Can we meet the disclosure date? If we can't, we go back to the researcher and we say, hey, we just can't meet this. Can we, you know, are they going to be, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope they accept it. I hope they accept the new date. I hope they're okay with the new date.
And it's very rarely when you're unless you're talking to like a small open source project that's 3 or 4 people, very rarely is the person you're talking to the person that's going to write the fix. So there's often external people they have to coordinate with. So I have engineering teams around the globe, depending on what the package is. I need to go find the maintainer for that. I need to go find subject matter experts. So that takes time. So unfortunately, it's not always a one-to-one relationship. So just try to be patient, and we try to state up front what our constraints are. Then your final phase.
Final phase. So do you decide to put a brand name on your, we will say no, please, no. Well, and we have an example, what Badlock, Sadlock.
Oh, hot damn.
Oh.
I am so very excited. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh my goodness, wait, I can't get mine open. You're gonna beat me.
It's delicious.
I'm making a mess. I didn't finish mine yet. You have to now talk
So
while I
what do you
finish.
want the public to know? So I will tell you, if you decide you want to brand your problem, if you want to brand your
I
problem.
really like it.
Said no one ever.
I do. It's yummy.
Great. Yeah, I'll get you another one. There was a team of researchers that found an issue, and they wanted to call it Badlock, and they thought they found the biggest, scariest problem ever. And when they released it and went public, the internet said, And then there was counter people that created Sadlock, and they had a whole kind of counter marketing campaign because this group of researchers thought they had this huge, huge problem, and it really was kind of tiny. And so they had the internet actively attacking them, working against them, and they were selling T-shirts with Sadlock on it. Actually, I have the icon
sticker?
here. I
There
have a
you go.
sticker right here. So you want to be careful. It's something you want to if you're going to consider it, think through what your risks are and what the blowback might be.
Yeah, I think there's also a misconception about the blogging and the disclosure part on the researcher side. I actually don't mind if you are communicating about your issue that you found. I just want you to
After it's public.
wait for me to have the fix out. And preferably, if you could wait 2 weeks after the fix is out so that my customers actually could get the fix and put it on their system. Because once I go and put it out there, then they need to go and, it's a chain reaction. And I could have another company that consumes something of mine, and then that company consumes something. So there's like this hierarchy of a lot of work. Maybe I shouldn't have had that work that I need to that you need to do. So I think you have to think about that. Like, I'm okay with you sharing your proof of concept, exploit stuff. You should. Other people want to learn from it. If you could just say, yep, maybe a little blog, like, yep, I found it, and then 2 weeks later put the rest of your stuff in, even better.
And you need to decide, are you going to talk to the media? Does your problem affect multiple products? You know, have you effectively talked with everybody? Because potentially you might tell me, but you tell me I can't talk to anybody else. Well, what about the rest of open source? You know, that they're going to get really angry at you. So you just need to kind of think through it and again, understand what your end goal was. Am I trying to get a job? Did you conduct yourself very professionally? Did you have good rapport? Did you ultimately get the issue fixed? You know, that could earn you accolades. Or if you do it poorly, if you go out and just post it on Twitter before anyone's ready, you're going to get yourself in trouble.
Right, and to think about that, if when you're doing the right coordinated vulnerability disclosure, you shouldn't be sort of teasing the issue that you found it. The whole point is to wait till the end when the company puts out their post about it that you then put your post to. Because if you start teasing it, someone else might find it, and then they might get that fame that you've been wanting to get.
So what if? So, what if you report something to me and I don't agree? That's not a problem. From my perspective, we don't say that, but I have seen examples where a vendor will say, that's a feature. You don't understand how that works. So you need to, again, plan through how you're going to react to that, how you're going to negotiate. What if you can't articulate the issue well enough and the issue can't be reproduced?
Or what if it's an as-is type of part where it's not in support? There's a lot of things that could happen where you may get discouraged, but as long as there's open communication with with both sides, I think you could sort of try to figure it out, right? Come to agreement. You don't want to burn your bridges here. Neither of us do.
Yeah, correct. And then, what happens if somebody else discovers your research? We don't exist in a vacuum. If chances are, if you found something, you're very smart. You're a beautiful, stable genius. But somebody else might have a similar idea and come at it from a different perspective and come to the same result. So you want to think through that if somebody scoops you, that might potentially change your timelines.
Right. I would say if you're going to have something that you want to write up, you probably should prepare it sort of earlier on, so then you have it ready just in case. And then you could still be able to post it. I also think if you are going to write something, share it with that company. Let them look it over, because you're trying to work as a team as much as you might not think it. We're trying to work as a team. So if I know what you're going to write, I can be more prepared for how is the media going to pick up on this. I can work with my PR and things like that to make sure I'm prepared, and then I can make sure that what you're writing, if you accept my feedback, just to make sure it's valid, because I wouldn't want you to not have anything valid and then it burn the relationship at the end.
And a lot of times, my security analysts will say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And it'll engage in a dialogue. So potentially be prepared for that we may provide you feedback on what you're going to state, and it may inspire additional research down the road. So for our parting thoughts here, be patient. We're all in this together. Even though your goal may be rewards and promotions and your name on the internet, we're here to try to safeguard end users of this stuff. So we ultimately are trying to help make things more secure. So please be patient. Sometimes it might take a little longer than you might initially anticipate.
Right, and some organizations aren't as mature with their processes, so you actually might know better than them what they should be walking through, and you might have to be the one to say, okay, where are you? Are you assigning a CVE? Forcing that type of thing, and it's not that the company probably doesn't want to do it, they just might not know that they should be doing things like that.
Especially if you're looking in you're researching in an IoT space. Unfortunately, a lot of those companies that are making these devices, it's blue ocean for them. This is something they're new and they've never done it. They don't have the maturity that a traditional software or hardware vendor might. So you just need to think about that as you're approaching. Again, you may know more than that company. You may have more people that are researching this than the team has that actually supports it, depending if it's a small open source project. And again, always try to assume positive intent. We don't intentionally try to be jerks or test your patience, but again, we have a lot of constraints. We have our schedules planned out months, years in advance. So you're coming in and stating there's a problem. We have to filter that. We have to give that feedback to other people that make business decisions. So just try to be patient.
Well,
and again,
yeah,
express yourself.
it could take a long time for the company to actually solve it. If it's a hardware type of issue, it could take significantly longer to, to address.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we have a little bit of time. Does anybody have any questions?
Don't be shy.
Who creates the CVE? Like, is it you as a vendor or me as a researcher?
The vendor. So,
So the question was who requests the CVE. So MITRE has a CNA program in what most companies, at least the bigger ones, they get assigned a big clump of the CVEs, and then you have them. If a company is not one of those, they could go to MITRE and request it, but the company should be the ones that are getting the CVEs, as long as there's no argument that they want to utilize that system, which most people do.
What if they do not want to utilize
If they don't want, the question was, what if they don't want to assign a CVE? Then you yourself can go to MITRE and ask them for a CVE for the issue, and then MITRE will try their best usually to get a hold of that company and work with them to do it.
and then there's some, if you don't know, so for example, it's an open source project. There is the DWF project, the distributed weakness filing, that kind of tries to represent all of open source. Ourselves, SUSE, we're CNAs, and we can offer CVEs on behalf of the open source.
Right.
CertCC is another great resource. You can talk to them and say, I would like to try, I'm trying to figure out how to report this and who's responsible, and they can help. And again, also help try to apply pressure to get the CVE issued.
Yep.
You're welcome.
Yes.
I understand the logic for open source companies, but for profit companies that don't offer any payout at all, is there sort of thinking, I mean, it kind of drives through a lot of times to disclose it unless
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So we were talking about, the question was about, in essence, bug bounties and if a company doesn't give any reward in that way. I have to tell you that's probably one of the most difficult decisions that a company makes when it comes to this is, do we have bug bounty or do we not? And I think companies often are reiterating and looking into that, looking at, BugCrowd and things like that, and HackerOne. One thing you could possibly think about is, and this is sort of a cheating way in a way, but what other companies consume that product line, and maybe those other companies have a bug bounty, and that could be how you could get paid if money is your goal. I think it's also a change in our culture of what's going on. I think a lot more people are doing the bug bounties. I mean, especially with the Spectre Meltdown stuff, like they're high profit, and I think it's going to be more and more common, which is good for the researchers.
And if the vendor doesn't talk about the bug bounty program, do a little research, because especially, again, like with the large industry impacting stuff, there are a lot of people and they're spinning up special programs just for a particular line. They might not have a general bug bounty program, but they might have something for a specific area of research.
Some of the bug bounty programs offer private programs, so you might not even know that they have it. And if you have shown that you're a good resource to work with, you may get invited because of that into it in a side channel.
A good side channel.
Good side channel. Yeah, there was another question. Yes.
So going back to the CVE question, how long does it take from that initial contact for the CVE?
So the question was, what's the length of time from initial contact to issuing a CVE? It depends. Depends on the maturity of the organization you're reporting it to, how much staff they have, how well you put your vulnerability report together. If you give me just an error log, I have to go get 5 or 6 people to go validate that. But if you explain, in this line of code, I see this happening and it gives me this result, That's much better, we can get it more quickly. Technically, it takes 5 minutes.
It's more about validating that the
We have to
issue.
validate that it is a
that
problem.
the issue is valid and that we have a plan for it. CVE is actually.
And there's not a duplicate.
It's really just a number until it becomes something, right? So I have a lot of researchers that ask for, you wrapping me up? Still, he's allowing me to finish it. So it's more about, and now I don't remember what I was talking about. There you go. Researchers, yeah, some researchers will ask me, when can I have my CVE, when's my number, things like that. And I don't mind giving it to you ahead of time, but really it's just an ID. It's not gonna do any good until I tell MITRE to activate it.
Thank you all. We're around for the rest of the weekend. If you see us, come grab us.
Yep.
We're glad to talk more.
Thank you.
Good job, lady.
You really didn't like this?
I have
It's
a
really-
question now that we're off the screen. What's the best way to get a free NVIDIA card?
Show me you're really good at your research, I may be able to get you one.
No one ever asked me for free software. Good job.
It's always fun. But you were supposed to toast me first, You go and cling and then you shoot. You didn't give me a chance.
I was just so excited.
Yeah, this made me look pitiful next to you.
Show me up later.
Can I fire a question your way?
Absolutely.
So you guys have published some of my vulnerabilities in your advisories, but I never reported them to you guys.
Okay.
Because there are other vendors and you package their software up and everything. Would you appreciate being given a heads up on that type of stuff, or does that just?
I would
come
love
as a
that.
heads up? Okay.
That would make my dreams.
Because almost just listening to your talk, I thought, well, you know what? Shit, the day we publish that, so you guys go.
Well, it depends. It's where you're like working with kernel or something Apache, something like a project.
Hey, what's up, dude? Haven't seen you for 2 years. How are you? Ukraine. Yeah, you're going to a more beautiful place, that's for sure. Yeah, you told me that. It should be a really good conference, I think. Yeah. Split your money in two, put one in the stock, the other, yeah. One of those places, Yeah. So, yeah, you'll enjoy it. I think you will. Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you. Brady. Hello. This is a Foxtrot journey of payload delivery. I am Dmitry Snezhkov, work for X4 Shred. A officially managing consultant, IBM Corporation Expert Red, but really just work on code, application, networks, humans sometimes code. And so today, I wanted to share an experience or a few things that we see out there when we do red team assessments, and some of the things that we come across and how maybe we solved the pain point that we had with creating some custom tooling, right? So if you're doing red team exercises or any kind of offensive adversary simulation, or even phishing attempts, right? Sometimes you come to realization that when you send a payload, that payload doesn't make it to the end user, let alone getting detonated. It just doesn't make it. Because you're sending from the outside, and sometimes you just can't prototype all of the things that going on the wire that stopped your payload. Could it be the link checker? If you send the link in the email, was the user able to navigate to your payload? Was it because you hosted your payload on a site that doesn't really have a good domain ranking at the time? Maybe your format or extension of your payload that you're trying to ship to the user is just not being supported, or they don't have the tools to unwrap it. And then this realization that 30 minutes after you send your payload, you have a frenzy of sandboxes visiting your C2 server, trying to communicate with your C2 server by obviously getting the payload. So at that time, you move into operation security mode, where you basically say, well, can I minimize the attribution? Can I avoid the attribution? What do I do next? Do I create a different pretext that I send to users? My vector is burned, my payload is burned. What do I do? Do I recode it? So in my experience, there are two types of customers, right, or companies. Some are very, very good with host-based detection. They use EDR on a host, they unwrap your payload, and that's how you get burned. But there are other customers that have very tight in-flight defense, meaning that the network is what burns you. And essentially, the problem of a red team here is that you really can't prototype a lot of the network defenses, because you can't prototype solutions that are happening on the wire at that customer. While you can't buy EDR for the host, you can buy an EDR for AV. It's kind of challenging to get the same thing going for the network. So in this talk, let's go through some of the things that we've seen and how we minimize that. So strike one, if we're talking about in-flight detection, is traffic correlation. Some known packets or signature of a packet gets pulled out. If you rely on your TLS by doing HTTPS or whatever custom SSL encryption you're doing, it will get unwrapped. And when it gets unwrapped, your payload is naked. You have behavioral patterns. You have a load, type, and frequency of communication to your C2 once you deploy. That, if people are actually watching on the network, gets you burned. And so what it comes down to is that if we, as red team operators, allow defenders to build a story to the point where they may not even know what that is, but if they know that it's known bad or unknown bad, or they get some form of alerting as to what they need to look at, we've already lost. So strike two is with the sandbox. Strike two is really about payload sampling. The frenzy that you've seen on your end when 15 or 30 different sandbox hybrid analysis, VirusTotal, McAfee, Falcon, doesn't matter, right, visits you and tries to analyze your patterns, that's a payload sampling. If one doesn't get you, the other will be able to get you and share it with the community. So correlation rules is if your payload actually makes it past the initial network interception. The secondary interaction is with the correlation rules on the internal network. How fast does the payload spread? Where does it go? Which users, or how it travels on the network? And then again, it's your submission to the cloud, to analysis engine, and you cannot use your payload anymore. Strike 3 is everything that basically surrounds your ability to deliver across the wire. It's your link inspectors, it's your domain ranking, the attribution capabilities that exist on the company, and so on and so forth. Let's minimize that. So we started thinking, what would be the improvement against certain things that happen on the wire? We know how to solve issues, to the better or for worse, on the EDR and the host, but we have no idea of what to do with the network. So primary goals for us to deliver a payload would be, obviously, it's a hostile traffic inspection, so we should not rely on TLS. We should be able to have the email or the link, if it's clicked, reach out to the external payload or external entity that basically downloads the, if you have a stager, download the payload. If you have a payload, download some other capabilities. We should go around the sandboxes that try to repeatably sample our payload and techniques. And obviously, you know, it's nice to have attribution minimization. It's nice to be able to work through the link inspectors. And it's nice when somebody on the other side can actually use your payload, because you can create a payload that is completely passing the defenses, but it's not usable because the other side, the customer, the client, the mark, doesn't have the tools to use it. It's like in an application support. So we started looking for things that may potentially you know, aid us in our quest. And one of the things that we came across was Firefox Send service. Think of it as Dropbox or Box or any other sharing mechanism that basically says, okay, drop us your file, we'll get you the link, send that link to a user that needs to get it, get the payload. In this case, we're working with a browser. We go into the browser, we're basically dropping a JPEG file. It gets somehow encrypted. It gets stored in an encrypted manner on the Firefox servers or Mozilla servers. And then the user goes out, gets the link on the other side, unwraps it, and downloads the JPEG. Seems easy. Very easy service. It gives you the link. If the link exists, you download it. If the link expires or doesn't exist, then the user can't download. So we started looking at this Firefox Send private service, and we thought, okay, well, what are the advantages of solving all of our issues, or some parts of our issues, really? Well, it's built with WebCrypto API, which is a standard way of using encryption in JavaScript and browsers. And so that's how the Mozilla is able to store encrypted payload, or in this case, any kind of file, right? It's a browser encryption, symmetric encryption keys get stored in the URL, and then that URL actually unwraps it in the browser. So it's a browser-to-browser communication. Keep that in mind. The actual server is open source. It can be hosted through Mozilla, or it can be hosted on your own domain. And so here's the traffic that we actually see. The request actually goes out to the upload. You know, you drop a file, and what you get is some form of a descriptor. The descriptor for the resource, and you get the decryption key in some form appended to the URL. Okay? That's what you send to the other user. In phishing exercises, or if you want to work on the inside and get your payloads from the outside or your tools into the enterprise, that's what you would do. So goal number one was to avoid traffic inspection through the TLS, right? And so what happens here is that an exe, or a file, or JPEG, gets symmetrically encrypted, and that's what, you know, the user actually retrieves on the other end. Curiously to note that the proxy that basically does the inspection happens, so the payload travels across the hostile customer network, right? And it ends in the browser on the other side. At that point, any kind of unwrap on the TLS or proxy happened. They unwrap the TLS, they do not see anything except for the encrypted blob of data. And so the link gets posted into Mozilla, you download the JavaScript, you unwrap the payload, and you download the file. It's very handy, right? So the proxy or traffic inspection is not in the picture anymore. We don't have to generate the shared keys either, because those are prepended and generated for us by Mozilla itself. The second goal is to actually reach for the payload from the customer network. A lot of things play towards it, but Firefox.com is mostly trusted. And so when the user gets a fish and tries to go out, you know, all your content ranking will probably allow the user to be able to get to Firefox.com. So we started thinking, well, how do we weaponize this thing? So let's split it into 3 areas. The red, which is us, trying to push the payload to the customer. The green, the Mozilla, the trusted entity, the middleman, so to speak. And the blue network, which is the customer network. In this case, we've proven the 2 goals, right? Let's move to number 3. So we can deliver the payload, but in the event that somehow it gets flagged in the middle, maybe there's a way to fingerprint once you unwrap the TLS. How do we minimize the capability for sandboxes to actually go out to our hosting server and grab the payload? Well, it turns out that Mozilla Sand Server provides us with really convenient features, which are really great. They're really good for users. They're useful features. For example, you can expire the link. You can state the number of times it can get downloaded. And Mozilla gives you a very generous size limit on your file. For example, if you want to store a toolkit, 1 gig should be enough for you. And of course, you can expire it in 24 hours and be done with it. So for example, if you do not want to attack that customer, if you do not want the user to download that payload, you can just leave it. It's going to be gone in 24 hours. You can also forcefully delete your payload if you want to. You can put password on it if you choose to. Okay, so on to number 4, minimization of attribution. In the beginning, when we started talking about Firefox Sand, what we said is that it's like Dropbox or it's like Box or maybe Google sharing, but it's really not. It's anonymous. You do not have to have a credential or set of credentials or user ID and a password to be able to sign up for this ID. You come in, you drop the file, and you just get a link. And every time you drop the same file, you get a different link. And every time you drop the file, you get a different shared key. So essentially, if defense gets our payload and signatures off of either a decryption key hash or maybe a resource ID, that's not going to help them. So number 5, capability to minimize response from link inspectors. Well, that's really just a good side byproduct of using Firefox.com. Firefox.com looks much better than any other site that you probably created in the past 2 days. So what do we get with this? We get fully custom application encryption. We get full support on the JavaScript because it's a JavaScript browser web crypto API. It's used by pretty much all the browsers except for Edge at this point. Probably will get there because just market pressure. So we decided to weaponize this happy file sharing service as we talked before. We created 3 tiers and we started looking into how do we actually productize that on a greater scale. So that's good and all. We can now do just manual sands. We can pretty much coerce companies to download or Marks on the other side to download the files without any kind of repercussions. We filled our initial 6 goals. But here's the thing. We really want to be able to do it fast. We want to be able to prototype it for more than just one environment. And while it's nice to do it just for that customer, we also want to do it for others because we think that, well, at this point the red team is actually losing the game and defense is really, really ramping up, and we have seen really, really good results from defense. So we actually need to step up our game and automate things. So what would be the 3 sort of auxiliary scenarios or goals for us to do something with this service? Well, we can build a delivery framework on it. We can have a lot more challenges, dealing with task synchronization, so we have to address that. And then finally, maybe, we can build a command and control with this. So we started decoupling what that actual service, what that service does. What are the web APIs that are so standard, and what can we do with them? You can do it with curl, of course, but it's kind of, you know, it's not minimized. It's very, you know, just manual. But you have a JavaScript engine, right? So we can toggle off of that. Web Crypto API is nothing more in JavaScript than JavaScript Crypto Web API plus crypto standards and HTTP libraries. So would it be fair to say that if you port it to different language, we can actually take the Web Crypto API, use the same encryption, AES, you know, do the SHA, whatever the case may be, apply the same HTTP libraries on a different side, and use the same crypto standards, so we can port it, say, from JavaScript to Python? Well, of course. But then the problem becomes that JavaScript, or rather Mozilla Firefox send servers, the Mozilla servers themselves, they don't have a way to notify the other side, the agent that we want to build, what to do with it. They just toggle data. So I can store the data, but I can't tell the data to tell somebody else on the other side what to do with it. So we needed a side channel. Side channel on HTTP, then you run exactly the same issue, because you have to have ranked domain, you have to be able to age it, you have to be able to trust it, and so on and so forth. You can use ICMP, but in our case, ICMP is fairly limited because it's kind of loud. It doesn't have a lot of capabilities to do what we need to do. We can use DNS. DNS is also being looked at from defense, but the way we do it is we're going to try to split the channel from the command and the data and minimize the actual traffic. So essentially, you know, that's our goal number 2. If we employ DNS, what do? We use a custom DNS broker, and we create a protocol, application protocol, what to do with that file, or rather a link, on a payload. So essentially what we want to do is we want to use TXT record, and that DNS TXT record is going to be encrypted by the shared key provided to us by Firefox. And that's going to be a fully valid DKIM record, which upon unwrap, because we know the key, will be able to provide a URL for the payload and a specific metadata, what to do with this payload. On the wire, it looks completely normal. It looks as if any text record, it doesn't travel very frequently. It's only there to give you the metadata, what to do with the file or the URL that you're trying to get there. Master-slave concept? Sure. More than one agent? Sure. So why not just do this? Why not just have a expansion of what we want to do? The red stays the red, the blue stays the blue, the green is our trusted Firefox server, and the yellow is our DNS server. And essentially we have 2 commands and control channels. We have gone from being able completely visible to the network inspection to be able to split the command channel to the DNS and the data channel to the Firefox send, so they cannot correlate us. We also built intervals to build in to get into that specific environment. You know, make sure that you know, our efforts are not very loud, because if you think about it, there are things that split the data on TXT records and shove maybe 1 million TXT records through the network, you know, getting your data across. But in our case, that one DNS TXT record is just a command, it's just a metadata. The data actually comes from the Firefox. So Firefox operation is pretty simple, right? You have a master that posts the commands through the Firefox link, through the DNS, to the slave, or the other way around, depending which way you want to communicate. If you want to exfiltrate data, the roles get reversed. You may want to send the payload through exactly the same mechanisms out to your C2 or out to any other communication endpoint. And everything is brokered through the DNS, right? So Foxtrot C2 is born. Foxtrot C2 is really just a mechanism to use split HTTP data delivery from DNS commanding. And on the wire, once you drop it in, it's going to look completely normal from both HTTPS standpoint when it gets a file from Firefox, and it's going to look very normal from the DNS perspective, unless you're actually watching and know exact split of that channel, right? The data goes on HTTPS and DNS only gets one packet. So what are defenses for this? Well, first of all, the vendors that deploy Firefox send on local network, private servers, should put CAPTCHAs, if they can, on Firefox, on exposed Firefox send server, because then we're not able to do real-time communication. We need to be able to solve CAPTCHA, right? Then they probably need to throttle the number of uploads to the endpoint. So for example, if I type shell-like commands, I have 5 seconds delay between commands on the Firefox send uploads, then no sensible business case would really cover every 5 seconds upload of files. And if you do, then you have to have certain specific provisioning, and you actually take, you need to take exception with that. And then defense, the blue team actually now needs to expect the split protocol delivery, because it's just too good of a vector for us to utilize, because we can actually go to different, we can bounce off of different mechanisms in order to split the behavioral analytics here. So while this is all good and bad, all good and all, but I think that what this boils down to the red team, which in this case I care about, is that payload delivery itself is not easy or hard. There's just a challenge with variables that you need to solve. Hopefully you get some ideas from this. I think that right now red teams are kind of struggling with existing tooling, and we need to create more tools to test that, because the adversaries will definitely move into split channels. And then you need to instrument yourself if you are on the defender side. You need to know what fails, you need to know your network, you need to acquiesce your network. And you actually need to know the behavioral patterns that exist, because if you see DNS-TXT, for example, when you shouldn't see DNS-TXT at all, for example, self-registration of dynamic DNS, that's a telltale sign for you to take advantage. So this is, this code is posted out there. It will move. Unfortunately, right now, it needs to be where it is, but definitely follow this Twitter, and we'll definitely give you the final resting place of it. This is a short presentation. We don't have a demo for it, but we're going to have a wiki. We're going to have videos on its use, and you guys can take it for a spin, use it in your environments if you feel this is good for you. If you have questions, let me know. I'll be around. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
sir. We're still waiting on a video adapter. Yeah, it is, isn't it?
What plug did you get to get that?
I think it's default, sadly. Everybody had a good day so far? Cool. Thanks for coming to the last talk of the day. I appreciate it. We'll see if we can actually get this running. Sure, why not? We can act it out. If you're not here to hear about ride sharing, you know, that's what we're here for today. So. All right, let's hope it works. All right.
Hey, SecOps. Security. Door!
All right, thank you for coming to my talk. It's Ride Sharks. Oh. Okay. Thank you for coming to my talk. It's Ride Sharks. We're going to be talking about ride sharing today. I'm Caleb Brown. You can find me at @NoGoodRobot on Twitter. I've been in technical industry for about 20 years, CISSP, GCIH, GMON, and for this this talk, really just an UberX driver. We're going to go through a little bit of history, some of the technology, the privacy, what I feel like are some of the attacks that are capable from a ride-sharing platform, ways to protect yourself, and then, if we have time, a couple stories. Now, ride-sharing itself has probably been around since what we understand is the late 1600s. As long as somebody's had some way of getting somewhere faster than walking, they've tried to make money off of it. What we understand more of a modern idea of ride-sharing really started as a carpool in World War II. It was used as an idea of resource sharing to try to help the war effort. 3 of these pictures are part of that, and then in the bottom middle you'll see one, the green one there, it kind of says pool it. That was an idea that really started again in the 70s during the gas crisis. The history of modern real-time ride-sharing pretty much started in 2006 in the UK with a company by the name of BlaBlaCar. And it was called that because the BlaBla was the way that the drivers were rated. So it was either blah was quiet, blah blah talked somewhat, and blah 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 talked too much. As we understand, in the United States, ride sharing really kind of started in 2010 with Uber as a black car service. In 2011, they started UberX, and then kind of went off to the races from there with Lyft starting in 2012. One of the later entries in 2014 was the taxi industry trying to get involved also with real-time ride sharing as it's starting to really hurt their business. As of 2018, these are 72 different examples of ride-sharing companies around the world. A lot of them are localized and or specialized in what services they offer. This really also goes into the history of ride-sharing. You could see when ride-sharing started in 2014 as of second quarter of this year to understand what's happening to the rental car business and the taxi business because of ride-sharing. It's absolutely eating their lunch. Now, technology-wise, who here has used ride-share? Show of hands. Pretty much everybody. Is there anyone here who's never used a ride-share? Okay, any specific reasons why? Okay, cool. Neat. All right. So pretty much everybody's familiar with the technology then. It's real-time ride sharing was not really capable. Good, good. So it requires smartphone technology. It really wasn't capable of till then. And also with the selective error rate of GPS being lowered in the 90s, that also made it possible. Right now, about half of all Americans probably have a rideshare app on their phone. Doesn't necessarily mean that they use it. About 5.5 million people a day, about 2 billion rides a year in total. This industry is not going away as much as municipalities or states are trying to control it now. The average length of the career for a driver is somewhere between half a year and a year, maybe longer, but the churn rate is exceedingly high on it. So privacy, I see it as a problem with the industry. Companies like Uber have struggled with it also. From the rider's perspective, I know a lot about you, especially if I'm working certain hours. I know where you live, I know your schedule, and with a little bit of social engineering, I could pretty much figure out who you are and what you do for this company. Now, the thing I won't know about you probably is your phone number. Most of these apps now actually give fake phone numbers. So if I'm a driver and I can't find you and I'm calling you through the app, I'll get a temporary number so I won't know it. Now, certain services like Uber Select, which is a higher end Uber, you'll have a lot of passengers that will try to get your phone number because they want you to be their personal driver. But beyond that, you don't really know anything about me beyond what the app tells you. Now, there's some background checks that go into that, but there's some arguments about if they truly engage with local law enforcement. Now, most of the two large companies of Uber and Lyft have really tried to step up their background check game to the point now where I believe if they aren't doing it now, by the end of this year, they're going to start doing real-time scrapes for possible DUI charges and other issues. It may only be on a local level that they wouldn't normally see with whatever background check they use. So from the attack perspective, this is where it gets interesting. This is a map of some of my war driving activities here in Louisville. So as an Uber driver, I have been war driving. So it's going to be grumpy because I'm not connected to the internet. This is just a sample of some of my war driving data. I can't really put it all into Google Maps because the KML just crushes the application. This was all harvested. Sorry about that. This is all harvested with a $150 Dell laptop from Best Buy, some USB Wi-Fi card and a USB GPS. I saw, you know, the numbers are on the screen here, for 4,300 WPA access points, for 45 WEPs, a bunch of opens, and a whole lot of no names, which are probably corporate networks. This was not hard at all to do. It was really trivial. I was using Kali Linux on this box, which had the native support for the Wi-Fi card, and then a little bit of Python to scrape the XML data and get it into a KML form, like a GIS data form. The real point of this, and this is the point that I would even say to any red teamers, these stickers are magical. I could do things like go into the expo center and not have to pay to park. And I think in larger corporate environments, I'd be willing to bet or guarantee that most rideshare drivers or anybody with this sticker in a decent modern car could probably get farther than they should. And also, I will say from the red team perspective, you're only going to get rides from your current area. So get the app, set it up, turn it on, go through the background checks. They're pretty trivial. It's just scanning some documents and sending to them. But then, if you know you're near a large corporate campus, you could throw whatever you want in the trunk and nobody's going to be any the wiser. You can get a badge reader 6 inches away from somebody's back if you wanted to. And you can make some money doing it. So one of my initial ideas, which I backed off from because of some legal implications, was to be a shark in the middle and was to use a Wi-Fi pineapple to do possible credential theft. Or my idea was to use the Wi-Fi pineapple to basically grab interrupt the signal from people's phones with Wi-Fi and basically give them a stop, turn off your Wi-Fi now page. Wasn't 100% clear on the legal ramifications of that, so I stopped short of it, but I wanted to put it in the slide anyways because it's something that's entirely possible that you could do in the car. So from some of the privacy recommendations are pretty simple stuff. It's really basic OPSEC stuff, you know. From the rider's perspective, there's nothing saying that you need to go directly to your home. You could pick a separate location and then walk from there if it's a relatively safe neighborhood. The companies themselves have understood what some of these dangers are, and now I think both Lyft and Uber allow you to share your ride with a friend. I highly recommend that you do that, and I'm not saying that any of these platforms are dangerous, and I'll go into that in a moment. But it's a great feature, and it gives people a wonderful peace of mind. Personally, when I drive, my wife likes to act as dispatch, and even if I'm in a Taco Bell drive-thru for too long, she'll call me and ask me what's wrong. From the rider's perspective, avoid personal discussions. I'd love engaging people in them just to see what I can get out of them. You'd be surprised the number of people that don't try to wear seatbelts in a ride share. I have a more modern car, so if you're in the front seat, the alarm is obnoxious. And I'm going to require it. I haven't had to pull over yet, but I've had to strongly convince drunk people to put their seatbelts on. Backseat drive also. Pay attention to where you're going. You know, don't assume that the directions that the driver is following are correct or he has your best interests in heart. It is a service that you are paying for by the time and by the mile. So there are situations where a driver can take a longer route just to run up the fare a little bit. As a rideshare driver, we hate short trips. So anytime there's a short trip, if you can find a way to cheese a little bit of extra space or mileage or time out of it, you probably will to avoid the minimum rate that you're going to make. And then, you know, and from the rider's perspective, you know, be respectful. It's not your car. I've had to lecture people multiple times about throwing trash out of the car. You would think in the 21st century we wouldn't have to do this. And it's also very similar from the driver's perspective. I would use a different phone. I didn't when I started. I totally would now, just to keep anything that is truly personal, that's mine, that has, you know, your entire life on it, away from anybody else. You know, share your rides, try to avoid the personal discussions. From the driver's perspective, make sure you're in good working order to drive your car. I've learned that you can make the experience a lot better if you're a tour guide, you know. Try to entertain people, you know, and also it's your car. If you don't like them, kick them out. So these headlines are big, and they're mostly overblown. You'll see them. Now, what's most interesting is the one that says number of deaths. This comes from a website that's called who'sdrivingyou.com. It is 100% a hit piece put on by the taxi industry. All they do is list all the bad things that Uber drivers have ever done. They don't say anything about the bad things that taxi drivers have ever done. So, and you're going to get that filter with the media, and they love picking on rideshare drivers. So, who's more dangerous? I really truly believe that sharks are still more dangerous than rideshare drivers. You know, last year, 88 attacks, 5 fatalities, possible 16 fatalities in Uber drivers for 2017. So, and that is it. That's my short and sweet talk on ride sharing. Any questions?
Any good stories?
Yes, I think the worst tip I ever got was, or tried to get, is someone tried to give me half of a 50-gallon bag full of bagels. Like a trash bag. Like they'd just come from a bakery and like, hey, do you want some bagels? And I'm like, no, I don't want any bagels. I would say, and the thing is from most aspects, all my riders have been pretty good. You know, I never had to downgrade anyone, and I never was downgraded myself. And I think that's where the danger in the platform may be as we go forward. Is we are building we're using this as our own social credit with each other. And if you haven't seen Black Mirror, I highly recommend you go find the episode where they're talking about the rating system that we're starting to use in our everyday lives. And it's going to, you know, it affects Yelp, it affects us rideshare drivers. And I think as time goes on, you're going to see more judgments based on that. Maybe not things that you can see, but they'll be there.
That is putting itself up real time in China right now.
Right, and I don't think that we're that far from that, not from the government side, but from the corporation side. Because if there are truly bad people using these platforms, at some point, these companies and their competition are going to have to communicate with each other about these bad apples. And in sharing that data, they're going to share a lot more data with each other. They'll be careful initially how they do it, but you know, it's taken them 4 years to understand how privacy starts to work with these platforms. You know, at least one rideshare company held an event for the press where they showed cars driving in real time with people's full names on it. And it took members of the press to stop them and go, this isn't correct, you should not be doing this. So, that's my spiel. Any other questions? Sorry.
Is the big passenger universal across all the apps?
What's that?
Where you said that you don't get the real phone number anymore for the passenger. I know that was a problem for a while where certain rideshare drivers would call female passengers after they drop them off to see if they were actually going out.
I think with the two major platforms, that is correct now. At least from my research, I have not driven for Lyft. I've only driven for Uber, and I don't speak for Uber or any other company in these statements. But I have noticed that they are fake. It's only because, you know, I worked an event with a lot of out-of-town people, and all the area codes are 502, and I'm like, well, this isn't possibly true. You know, like these people can't all have Kentucky numbers. So, go ahead.
Did you come across anybody who was doing any sort of, you know, red team fuckery with this at all when you were doing research that it was going a little further than you were wanting to?
No. Actually, the kernel for this talk started with one of my passengers who took an Uber ride that cost about 6 times more than it should have, and then woke up the next morning and, as she stated, didn't have any money left in her PayPal account, and they ripped about $380 off from her. Now, a story told to me, but the person would have no reason to really make this up per se. It's not sensational enough to be truly entertaining. And I don't know that the rideshare driver necessarily attacked their device. It probably was, if I had to guess, would have been, you know, publicly available breached credentials could easily be leveraged at that point, you know, because you can go back and look and see who was in your car and scrape out that data. It wouldn't be hard, considering that you can still get the GPS data back and you can see where all your routes are from the application itself. Because a lot of that data is still held on their side. And you don't have to give your full, you don't have to put in your full name in the rideshare app. So it's another quick tip. Now the driver does. You, so. What's that? Oh, fair enough. I just used it as a way to make jokes for this talk. So. Right, true. Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.